Good to see you.
Well, hello, world, and welcome to the Crisis Victory Show. My name is Dr. Hal Bradley. I'm the executive producer and host, and also have Pete Turner, who is co-host and co-producer of the show with me. Pete also has the Break It Down show, and hi, Pete, good to see you up on screen. And I behoove any of you that watch this show to follow Pete's show at the Break It Down show. Also, get some pretty interesting guests on there. Anyway, today we have a really good interview that's set with us. An associate of mine. His name is Gunner Allen Lindbloom, and Gunner used to be had ties to the Detroit mob up in Michigan, and has come a long way from those days. And I'm going to let Gunner tell his story. So, Gunner, welcome on the show. Good to see you.
Hey, thanks for having me, buddy. I appreciate it. So I guess I'll kind of dive to give people perspective and understanding who or what I was. I'll start at the beginning and then kind of work my way up through to where I am today. But essentially, my mother was mentally ill, manic depressive. My father was a drunk, alcoholic, abusive. Parents divorced when I was 4, and I moved in with my grandparents, my grandpa and grandpa Toko. Now, if you're from Detroit, most people know that name, Toko. It's synonymous with the mafia, right? My grandfather was cousins with the boss of the Detroit mafia, Giacomo or Blackjack Toko. They all hailed from the same neighborhood in Sicily. So his father and the boss's father were cousins who grew up together in a little neighborhood back in Sicily. And they all, a whole bunch of Sicilian families immigrated to Detroit in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. And they all lived in the same neighborhood, supported each other. They even built their own church. It was a very cloistered community. So a lot of them didn't speak English, so they just worked together. At the time, there was a lot of bootleg money going around. The mafia obviously was heavily involved in bootlegging in Detroit, liquor coming in from Canada. They controlled all that liquor coming in from Canada, going to Chicago and New York and all that. So they made the modern day equivalent of hundreds of millions of dollars, and then they spread it around through their cousins. And you want to start a construction company? Here's the money. You want to start this business? Here's the money. They also helped each other get contracts by greasing city officials and mayors, and it kind of began to phase into almost more legitimate, a lot of the family than not. But it got a lot of the family and a lot of cousins and relatives on their feet. And by the times it was 50s and 60s and 70s, I mean, everybody had moved from the city proper because, the ghetto started encroaching because of the factories and stuff. And these people made a lot more money. They were successful. They owned businesses. Their kids had gone to college. So they moved to Grosse Pointe, Michigan, which is a very wealthy enclave outside of Detroit. And they still stayed in the same community, very close. Everybody lived within, a mile or two of each other, and very close. Everybody talked, saw each other, whatever. I didn't know any of this, obviously. Then I go to live with my grandparents in Grosse Pointe. Don't know nothing about the mafia. I was a kid. This is back in the 70s. And then one day I got this girl who I kind of had a crush on, had a birthday party, but she didn't invite me, and I was kind of brokenhearted about it. So I asked her, at school the following week or whatever, why didn't you invite me to your party? And she says, my mom says you're in the mafia. And I said, I don't even know what that is. I'm just a little kid, I'm like 6, and but I had Uncle Pete, who was 12 years older than me, who was kind of like an older brother because he was only 12. It was my mother's youngest brother. And I remember saying, what's the mafia? And he kind of laughs and looks at his buddy who he's with, and then looks at me and says, "Oh, you'll see, you'll find out. It's our family." So for the next 5-6 years, I start paying closer attention to my family, and I do notice that people treat us differently. Like at the store, they wouldn't accept my grandpa's money or my money. If I go to buy candy at the store, they say, "Oh, no, this is for free, Alonzo. Tell your papa I said hi." Or they'd send me with some meat or something home. There's a little corner store that all the kids hung out at, and everybody would give my grandfather like two-handed kisses and hugs and handshakes, and something was different. Clearly, we got treated differently, right? And then around 12, I think I was about 12, I saw the movie The Godfather, and and then it all made sense. But then it kind of clicked in my mind. I'm like, wait a minute, you know, like my family was like the Godfather, very Godfather-esque, and somebody's got a bird I can hear. But and so what ended up happening was it's kind of instilled in my mind that there's that being a criminal is not only acceptable in my family but encouraged, because the guys who pulled up in the Cadillacs and had the big pinky rings and looked like the mobsters and had a big knot of money in their pocket, they're the ones that got the most respect and love, and and so I was like, so it's okay to be a criminal in my family or whatever. So that's what I ended up.
It was cultural and generational.
I noticed things, and so okay. And then around that same age, 12, 13 years old, I remember seeing a mini bike that I really wanted badly, and I knew my uncle, who was kind of like a young, I don't say wise guy, because he never wanted to be in the mob, but he was surrounded by the mob. See, the thing about the mafia is, especially in Detroit, particularly in Detroit, the old mob dons and mob bosses and stuff, they didn't want their kids involved in the mob. They didn't want their kids going to prison or getting killed and then involved. So they pushed them to get educated. They pushed them in school. Some of these mob bosses had degrees, college degrees. The boss had a college degree. The underboss had a college degree. These guys their fathers pushed them to go, into legitimacy. So they had a lot of kids, but most of them were pushed into legitimate arenas. So there was only a few like oddball screw ups, who just went the wrong way or came from broken homes, like me or my uncle Pete, who was dyslexic. So he dropped out of school when he was 15. And so he was involved with a lot of like criminal activity, selling drugs and really anything to make money. And so I knew he was a hustler. He hung around some young, like wise guys, hustlers. They, in other words, tracksuits and, all drove motorcycles and they were just slicksters. I kind of looked up.
It sounds like Pete was an earner.
I don't think he was ever a big earner, but he was an earner for himself. But he wasn't. He's flat out told me, he's like, you don't want to be in the mob. That's for suckers. He's like, the mob. Why would you want to give some of your money to Uncle Tony and then have him boss you around for the rest of your life? It makes no sense. He's like, that ain't me. I'm never gonna, take. He's like, the mafia is for suckers. What they do is they find young, impressionable kids from broken homes who have nothing, that want to latch on to something. They romanticize the mafia world and they suck them in, so now they can earn them money for the rest of their life and they can boss them around. You got to do that. You got to do that. Kill him. Bring this money here. Jump there. Do that. And my Uncle Pete was smarter than that. He's like, no way. But he was still a criminal. So I said to him, man, would you buy me this mini bike? I saw it on the side of the road because I went to my grandparents' house. At this point, I was living with my mother and my sister. And we were living really bad. We were on welfare, living squalid. But every weekend from Friday to Sunday, we'd go back to the old neighborhood and we'd hang out. And on the way there, I saw this mini bike and I told my Uncle Pete, I really want this mini bike. He's like, I'm not buying this mini bike. And he said, but I'll tell you how to get it. And I said, well, how? He says, those Jerry Lewis donation cans, you can get them from the store and you jingle it in front of the store. Would you like to donate to Jerry's kids? Jingling, and they get some change or something. He's like, you get that, stand out there, get the money, raise the money. You can pop the lid on it, keep the money, buy your mini bike. So now this is my uncle who I looked up to telling me that this is the type of behavior that is okay to do. Now I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I didn't see it as that wrong because my uncle said do it. And I knew that my family was a bunch of criminals. I knew that the mobsters in my family were gangsters and that they were just like the guys in The Godfather. So I'm like, and everybody gets all this love from the community. So I'm like, whatever. So I did it, and I am raising $140, and I bought the mini bike for $90. And then shortly after that, I really got into freestyling on a bike, doing the tricks. And I wanted a new bike, this nice bike. But my mother, who was on welfare, said I can only give you $100 for a new bike, and the bike I wanted was like $500. So I told my uncle, would you buy me the bike? And he laughed. He said, I'm not buying you the bike, but I'll tell you how to get it. He says, go get your cousin Frankie. So I said, all right. I go get Frankie, and my uncle says, listen, go up to Grosse Pointe South during the day, steal Alonzo his bike, steal this Haro bike that he wants, and then bring it. And he said, he'll give you $50 next weekend when he comes back. And he said, okay, I'll do it. Johnny came from money. His dad was a mobster in prison. And but his mother married some dude with a bunch of money and then divorced him, so they had a big mansion, and he didn't have to be a criminal. He would become a murderous lunatic. But at the time, he's like, yeah, I'll do it. So I come back the next week, and he didn't give me the exact bike that I wanted, but pretty close. It was still a Haro, and I gave him $50 and got to keep $50. And I was like, oh, this is how it works. And for the rest of my life, it basically until I went to prison, that's kind of how I went through life. At age 15, I was expelled. I was actually expelled from 8th grade. I failed 8th grade the first time, was expelled from 8th grade the second time, and kicked out. Went to high school, made it 9 weeks, was expelled indefinitely from the whole school district because of I was involved in a stolen merchandise racket. I wouldn't tell on my friend who was running it, and I got caught wearing a leather jacket that he had stolen, and so they kicked me out. And so now I'm 14 years old. I'm on the street. I'm not even old enough to go to adult ed. So I had a moped, and I just ran around this, all the dropouts and the druggies and the burnouts and the scumbags, the ones that weren't in school. I started selling them drugs, and it wasn't like a ton of drugs, but a little here and a little there to make a few bucks. And then I got to the point where I was starving. My father wasn't feeding me, man. I was living with my dad. My mother went to a mental institution. I had to go live with my dad, and he was a drunk and he didn't buy food, and I was starving. And so I knew one drug dealer, and I went and asked him to front me some there's a good story. There's an area near where I live. It's all black neighbor projects, all black projects called the Cordobas and Oxford Square. I had a friend in there named Sydney, a black dude. Me and my boys would drive our mopeds over there, and we'd hang out at Sydney's, and we'd smoke a joint with them, and we'd kind of hang out. It was a place to go. But his brothers, this is the height of the crack epidemic in the 1980s, and his brothers and cousins would come in, and they'd always say, hey, man, Al, you got that good weed. You always got that good green weed. Man, you white boys got the good green weed. All we get is this brown dirt weed and da-da-da. And so they want me to sell them my bag. And I'm like, no, I'll sell you a joint or two or whatever. They give it to me all. And they would give me like $20 for like 2 joints. And that's enough to buy a whole nother bag. So I got it in my mind. I had this leather troop jacket, like a $300 leather troop jacket my mother bought me for Christmas. And the drug dealer that I knew told me that he would give me a half ounce of weed for it. And in my mind, I could flip this half ounce of weed in this black projects and make a bunch of money and keep it going. And I could feed myself and da-da-da. So I jumped on this really raggedy, crappy moped that had a cable as a throttle. And I drove it 2 cities over to this drug dealer's house. Long story short, I convinced him to give me a quarter pound of weed. I went to the black. I called my cousin Frankie and I said, hey, listen, I'm going in the Oxfords, man, to sell this weed. I need you to bring your dad's gun, because his dad was in prison, but he found his dad's gun. I said, bring your dad's gun. I need you to have my back. And to him, this was a good time. He's like, oh, this sounds awesome. So I go post up in the Oxford Square of this projects where all these crack dealers are sitting on the corners and selling crack. And I basically said, yo, I got the good weed. And they'd come over with knots, and they'd be like, let me get 5 bags. Let me get 3 bags. Let me get them, boom, boom. And of course they didn't rob me, because my cousin was sitting there with a gun out. He had a gun out. Like,
the gunner's got game.
The gunner's got gun. He's got gun. Yeah. And they would say to me, like, what's up with your boy and that big old gun? Because it was a 44 revolver. And I said, oh no, he's just watching my back. He's just watching my back. And obviously if I didn't have him there, they would have robbed me in 5 minutes. You know what I'm saying? Somebody would have punched me in the face and just took my bag and left, and that would have been that. But because he was there, they were like, we gotta respect this little white kid. And they did. They're like, man, this little white kid is, in the heart of the, the storm, pumping weed to it's crazy. And anyways, from that point on, I got and started selling drugs, and I eventually got a little older, and I got into working out, trying to get for the girls, and I started selling steroids, and I got involved in a big, huge steroid operation that was organized crime, and that got busted. I got busted. I was all over the papers. It was a huge thing. It was the biggest steroid bust in American history at the time. It was all over the news. 55 guys, $8 million, millions of doses of steroids, like 5 different states, 3 different countries. It was this huge network. These mob dudes were, like kind of low level. They were low level mob guys. They were just like street level wise guys, Italian dudes. who are in their 20s, in their 20s and early 30s, and I was only 17. So I was just like a young punk. They were like old men to me, you know what I'm saying? But they got it, but they got busted. And the guy, Joe DiMaggio, who got busted, he ended up getting a big shot lawyer. And I think he ended up in prison for a few months and then like 5 years on tether. And I think he paid $1 million for his lawyer. So he was a baller. But anyways, and after that, my life just kind of, I got busted for the steroids. I ended up going to jail for selling steroids for 6 months. Now, here's an interesting thing I shouldn't breeze over because it's very important. When I was in jail, that time I was in jail, I was running a dice or poker game. I can't remember. And, there were, I was a kid. I was only 17 years old. No, at the time, by that, it took me 18 months to get sentenced. By the way, my according to my uncle, my grandfather paid a judge 10 grand so I wouldn't go to prison. Because keep in mind, I by the time I got busted with the steroids, I already had like 8 felonies. So I mean, I was and I had 8 felonies already. I've been busted with pipe bombs. I've had multiple assault and batteries, destruction of property, receiving and concealing, on and on. I had all these charges. So by the time I got busted with the steroids, the prosecutor was like, "Oh, he's got to go to prison." And my grandfather, according to my Uncle Sal, paid the judge 10 grand, and they moved the venue because for like a year, more than that, 18 months, my venue was this one judge who wanted to put me in prison. We kept getting postponed, and then my grandpa paid this judge, and they moved the venue from that judge to this judge, and he gave me 6 months county time. So anyways, so now I'm in the county.
10 grand.
Yeah.
Worth 10 grand.
Well worth it. So I'm in the county jail, and one day I'm a couple months into this little bit, and I get into it with somebody, you know what I'm saying, and like basically a lot of the guys in there knew I was a tough kid, like you know what I'm saying, my street reputation followed me. I was a tough kid, and everybody, even though I was a little 17-year-old, or by the time at this point I'm 19, but I had done some bodybuilding shows, so I was a big muscle bound kid. I was about 180 pounds ripped up, so I wasn't like a little punk. And so, and plus people were like, "Oh man, that kid in the street is a monster." I done seen him knock out 10 different guys. So even the black dudes in there were kind of nervous about me. But at some point, somebody did something that irritated me, and I told my boy, like, run the table, man. I got to step away before I kill somebody over here, or whatever. So I go to sit down at the table, or on my table by myself in the day room, and I look on the floor, and I see this like a little, I don't know, it's not this big, but like a little pamphlet. It's open on the floor, right? And I don't know what caused me to pick it up. So I reached down there and pick it up, and it was called The Daily Bread. It's a daily devotional called The Daily Bread.
Yep, I read them in prison.
Yeah, me too. Every single day in prison, I read one for 13 years. But anyways, I pick it up and I read it, and at that moment, that message, whatever it said, spoke to my heart. And it was like, I was like, wow, this is pertaining to exactly what I'm thinking at this moment, which is remarkable. And I said, this thing's cool. So I took it in my cell. I had a one-man, single man cell, which I was very lucky to have. Most cells were two-man cells. I had a single man, and I put it in there. I'm 11 stories up. Macomb County Jail, it's got 11 stories, and I was at the top floor. That's the max security. And so I start reading this book every night, right? And it's relevant to my life. Like everything, every day, it's like whatever happened in that day, at the end of the day, before I go to bed, I'd read this, and it was recapping my day and what I was thinking. So it was really remarkable. And then a dove started landing in my window. Keep in mind, I'm 11, so you'll get this little 4-inch glass slit in the window, right? Yeah. And this dove, I'm 11 stories up, so I'm pretty far up. This dove just kept landing there looking at me, and it's looking at me. And I tell my boys, come here, look at this dove, man. It's sitting in my window. It's crazy. And they're like, nobody said, that's a representative of God or an angel descending or the Holy Spirit. Nothing like that. They're just like, oh, cool. That's cool. Dove. You got a pet dove. And then I would read this book every night for about 2 months, right? And I came to the conclusion after reading it that God was real. I was raised Catholic because I'm Italian, and I live in an Italian house, but I didn't know anything about Christ or Jesus or faith or nothing like that. I didn't know nothing. I mean, I didn't pay attention in catechism, but this made me realize that God was real. Like, I was like, this legitimately has to be God reaching out to me. He's real, and he actually cares enough about me to like create what's happening here with this book.
Yeah,
So
I'd like to cut in here, Gunnar,
go
because you
ahead.
know what? When I was in federal prison, I did state prison in Folsom Prison, California in the 80s. I went to the feds in the 90s. And it's really interesting because it's not like we're religious freaks or Jesus freaks or anything of the nature at all. But what happens is our life slows down during that time and we start taking precedent to something that's brought into our life, and we really start analyzing it and thinking
Mm-hmm.
about it. And in my time in federal prison, I completed 2.5 years of seminary. I was formally ordained while I was in the prison, and Johnny Gambino threw my feast out on the yard because all the Italian boys knew that I was for real with my following. So isn't it amazing hearing your story about the daily bread? And I read those every day too. That is just amazing to hear that again.
Well, here's where it gets even more remarkable, man. So I got a lawyer. My girlfriend paid a lawyer to try and get me a time cut, to try and shave 34 days off my sentence. That's it. And those things don't happen very often, but it was only
No,
$500 for the lawyer. She,
why not? Yeah,
yeah, why not? The lawyer
yeah.
filed a motion, and my court date comes up. So I never looked forward to the next day on this book. I read the book, and I never looked to the next day because I didn't want to but on that night before I went to court, there were still about 10 or 12 pages left. And I think every 3 months, they give you a new one. And it
Yeah.
was like, there was still probably another 20 daily devotionals in there, or should have been. And I said, well, I wonder what tomorrow's looks like, since I may not be here. What if I get a time cut? I might not be here to read it. I'm just curious what tomorrow's looks like. And I opened it up and it was blank. All the pages were blank. The rest of the book was blank. And I knew that I'm going home. So when I went to court the next day, and I had this like monologue rehearsed, that I'm going to tell the judge and all that. He says, Mr. Lindbloom, do you have anything you'd like to say? I said, yes, Your Honor. He's like, bang, time cut granted. Next docket, whatever.
Yeah.
And they threw me out of there, and that was that. So that planted a seed into me that God was real. So I began to have a relationship with God from that day on. And I always pray, even though I was a criminal, and I was doing criminal activities, and I was robbing and stealing and selling drugs and using drugs and all the crazy stuff that I was doing, I always kept God at the back of my mind going. I used to drive my Ninja, this crotch rocket, like a friggin' maniac, man. And before I got on it, I go, Father God, keep me safe on this thing. And he did. I can't believe I didn't kill myself on that thing 1,000,000 times. And that's a whole nother crazy story. But anyways, after I got out of jail from that, I moved back in with my grandparents because before I went to jail, I was living with two cousins, Dino and Joe. And it was a bad environment. They're both drug dealers. They're both using drugs. They're bodybuilders. They're a little bit older. They're big muscle bound guys, but they just got introduced to this drug called Nubane, which is synthetic morphine. And we didn't know how dangerous and addictive that was. And they were like using it. Then they started dabbling in heroin. And I'm like, I'm not going back there. I'm going to go live with my grandparents. And of course, I wasn't out 3 days, and somebody fronted me 10 pounds of weed and $5,000 worth of steroids. And I found a way to get prescriptions for Tylenol 3s. So I'm selling Tylenol 3s by the thousand. Yeah, it didn't take me long because it's it. So I'm back in the street running around crazy. I try to get a job or two. It didn't work out. It lasted a week, 2 weeks. And then I'm just hustling and chasing girls. I'm at the beach. All I did was, live that life of a young, like, wise guy. You know what I'm saying? I was in the club, at the beach, or at the gym, or with the girl. I ran around selling drugs, throw a pound here, half pound there, quarter pound here, bottles of steroids there, bottles of steroids there. And I wasn't like a aggressive, money hungry guy. Like I had friends who became huge drug dealers, right?
Yeah.
Most of it weed, hundreds and hundreds of pounds, even thousands of pounds later on. They were like ambitious and smart, and they were killing it. Where me, I'm like, listen, if I got 10 grand in the bank, in my pocket for lawyers, and I can feed myself and go to the club and buy nice clothes, and that's all I need. You know what I'm saying? That's all I cared about. So I wasn't. So anyways, ended up going to my cousin's graduation party. Nina was her name. And my grandmother said, you got to go and bring her something. She's just graduated. And I'm like, last time I saw her, I didn't even know her that well. Like last time I saw her, she was like 14. Now she's 18. I forget about the party, and I go to the beach, and I'm playing, I'm out playing Frisbee with my boys at the beach. I'm drive my Ninja, and my grandma beeps me, and I'm like, that's weird. My grandma's beeping me. I call back, what's up, Grandma? She's like, why aren't you at Nina's party? I'm like, oh, I forgot. She's like, you need to get there right now and bring her something. I'm like, all right. So I'll go home. I get a card. On the way back, I buy a card, put $100 in there, and then and I get dressed like a, this is back in the 90s. So I had a suit vest on with no shirt underneath. I'll never forget. It was I had black like Z Cavaricci shorts, dress shorts, like a khaki colored tan tweed vest, unbuttoned, no shirt, with a big gold chain, and I'm on a Ninja, and I pull up on a Ninja, and I end up going in the backyard, and when I walk in, there's this big party. It's almost like The Godfather with that one wedding, but not as big, but something like that. The music's playing, there's a circus tent, there's tables of food, and everybody's underneath the big umbrella tent, sitting around talking. I go grab some food and pile my plate, say hi to some of my aunts, my little cousins, these little kids are like, dance with me, Lonzo, dance with me. They want to dance. And I'm just like, and then my grandma says, Alan, did you go see Nina? Have you seen Nina? I said, no, I just got here meeting. She's like, she just walked in the house to eat with her friends. Go say hi. So I go in the house, and Nina was pouring glasses of wine, which is funny, on the counter. She didn't hear me slip the back door, slide door open, and I said, better not let your mom see that. And she flinches. She turns around. She goes, oh, so she comes give me a hug. I give her the card, and she's like, you don't have to give me any money. You just got out of jail. I know you just got out of jail. And then she brought up a funny story. She's like, you want some wine? I said, no, I'm not allowed to drink at party or your family party. She says, why not? I said, because I crashed Uncle Joe's car a couple years ago. And when she's like, oh, she's like, I heard about that. She's like, what happened? I heard about that. I'm like, too much wine. He sent me to get cigarettes. And on the way back, I crashed the car right in front of the house, right in front of this anniversary party, like 50 people out there. And so it's funny. And anyways, after I say hi to her and her friends, I go outside. And I hear this conversation where my grandfather is speaking in Sicilian with this guy named Tony Giacalone. He's a very famous mobster. He was the last person to be seen with Jimmy Hoffa. It's funny, this book I'm holding.
I've heard his name. I've actually heard his name.
Tony Giacalone is listed as in the top 10 gangsters of all time in American history. He's a very bad guy. I didn't know this. I knew he was, mob guy, but I didn't know. All I knew is when I was a kid, very young, that my mother said, this is your Uncle Tony. I think the first memory I have of him was at my birthday party when I was like 6 years old. And he was with my Uncle Nicky, and they walked in and they ended up teaching us to play poker. I didn't really know. I mean, I had so many uncles, this is Uncle Tony, this is Uncle Joe, this is Uncle da. And I'd seen him around. I'd seen him at the house. I'd seen him in the market. I'd seen him here and there. And I barely talked to him. He's an old man. You know what I'm saying? Why would I talk to him? And my Uncle Pete, who I was close with, told me, he's like, Uncle Tony's a serious player in the mob. He would ultimately be the street boss and probably the most powerful mobster in the city. Now, Jack Tocco, who was the actual boss or the Don, he was the most powerful, and Tony answered to him. But honestly, if Tony wanted to overthrow Jack and just take the throne, he could have. But Tony had sworn an oath to his former mentor, Don Uno Zarelli, the one who was a driver for him. Tony was the driver for Uno Zarelli, who was the original Don of the Detroit Mafia. And he says, I want Jack Tocco to be the next boss, and you're going to respect that. And you need to promise me that you'll always respect that. And Tony loved him so much. He said, okay. So he submitted to Jack Tocco, but he was the gangster of gangsters. I don't know any of this. I would learn a lot of this after I got out of prison from history books and stuff. But anyways, I hear my grandpa say to him, Tony, you think you can get Alonzo some work? Or, and he says, yeah, sure, P. I'll see what I can do. And my grandmother says, no, he doesn't need to work, and he's going to go to college. And while I was in the county jail, I took the GED, and I scored so high on the GED that I got a scholarship, like a small scholarship. It was like $800. And so my grandmother and grandfather said, we'll match it, and my dad will match it. So now I got $2,500 to go to college, which I did do. For 2 years, I went to community college, and mainly because of all the hot girls that were there. But I had straight A's. For 2 years, I had a 4.0 GPA, and I did enjoy it, and I took classes I liked. But anyways, she says, no, he's going to go to college. My grandpa says, well, he's still got to work. You need to keep out of trouble. He needs to stay busy. And my grandmother says, no. And I spoke up and I said, do I have any say in this? And they all look at me. There's a big table full of Sicilians, and they're all speaking in Sicilian. And my grandpa says, you know what we're talking about? I said, yeah, you just ask Uncle Tony if he can give me a job. He's like, yeah. And my grandma says, slams her hand on the table. Bang. She says, I said no. He's going to school. He doesn't need a job. So later that day, I asked my grandpa in private, I said, why is grandma so against me working, with Tony, or Tony get me a job? And he says, you know what Uncle Tony does? I said, no, I mean, no. He's like, really? You're not
Yeah.
stupid. And then I said, oh, you mean that kind of job? He's like, my grandpa said, something to keep you out of trouble, nothing major. So I got it. Now, about a couple weeks later or less, Tony comes to the house, walks in, and I happen to be walking through the house, and I grab an apple, and he says something. I think he said, we talked about jail. He's like, how'd you like college is what he said. It was just jail. And I said, it sucks. He's like, believe me, I know. He's like, I spent 7 years in college. And anyways, he says, oh, by the way, I got you a job. And I'm like, well, what's up? He's like, well, go up to Brownies on the Lake. You know where that is? I'm like, yeah, it's like the hottest nightclub in the city. It's like right on the lake, or it's a big nightclub. He's like, go up there, ask for Al. He's the owner. He's a friend of mine. Tell him I sent you and that, hire you for security. I said, okay. So I walk in there, and, a couple days later, I go in there and I ask for Al. It's this little skinny, weird old dude. But this is what I say though. I said, hey, Tony Giacalone sent me. I just said Tony Jack. He knew. I said, Tony Jack sent me and said, you want to hire me to be your head of security? And he looks at me and goes, Tony Jack said that? I said, yeah. He said, you're going to hire me to be the head of security. He says, okay. Yeah, there's no way he could say no. There's no way he couldn't say no. He knew if that's what Tony says, that's what it is. It is what it is. So he brings me in the back, gives me a few security shirts. He says, you're going to work on these nights. Here's the list of all the rest of the, bouncers. You need to make sure you have at least 4 guys or whatever it is. And I end up getting a bunch of my boys' jobs as bartenders and barbacks and waitresses and all kinds of stuff. But it turned out it was like the biggest mob hangout in the city. So there was like 3 generations of mafiosos hanging out there. There was the older generations that were like in their 50s, and there was the generation that was like in their 30s, and then like the ones my age or even younger than me, cousins of mine, since they knew I worked the door, they would come in there and just like, Cousin Al, and they give me a hug and all this, kiss on the cheek. But I couldn't say no. They're 17, 18-year-old kids. They put suits on and they wanted to go hang out in this like hot nightclub with all these hot chicks, where all these mob guys are, And so I couldn't say no. So they'd all come and give me a kiss on the cheek. But over those 3 years that I worked there, I made, a lot of connections with like, mob guys, and like I said, lower level guys, but, between drug sales and weed sales and different scams and rackets. There's so many different like little scams and rackets I could get into. And one example was the guy came to me with a safe job. Some guy was from Miami on a big boat, and he said there's $250,000 worth of jewelry and cash in this safe. So we orchestrate this big bank heist, and the safe heist, and we get it, but it only had like 15 grand worth of jewelry and stuff in it. It sucked. And then that's a crazy story, because you kind of remind me of the guy who set it up. What's his name? His name was Burgess. Last name, I won't say his first name, but anyways, he was the one who brought the safe gig to one of the mob guys. They referred him to me. The dude had a son. We all orchestrated the whole thing. Then when we got the money, we were supposed to split it up, divvy it up after we sold the jewelry and stuff. We end up getting in a car. I'm with my cousin Johnny, and I'm driving the crash car. I remember him saying, bring the crash car. Let's go pick up this guy, and we're going to divvy up the money. And I'm thinking, why would I? He says, listen, he lived in Mount Clemens. He says, get on expressway and head north, like 26 mile. I'm like, why? He's like, I got to go stop by this girl's house and pick something up. So once we get way out in the freaking boonies in the middle of nowhere, he starts telling the old guy, this old gangster from Chicago, but he wasn't Italian. He was just like I don't know what he was, but he was a killer. Somebody told me, he's like, do not mess with that guy. He's a killer. He's got bodies. He ain't to be played with. Don't play with him. So make sure you don't, do him dirty. And we're in the car driving, and they start arguing over the money. And because they said, you shouldn't get Johnny's going, you shouldn't get a third, you should only get this. And he's like, that wasn't the deal. And They're arguing. Next thing you know, Johnny says, pull off here in the middle of nowhere. So I pull out the road, and Johnny's leaning over the back seat, like arguing with this guy. And I'm just driving, music's playing, not paying any attention. Yeah. And all of a sudden, bang, I hear a gunshot. And I slam on the brakes. What the frick? And I look in the back, and the dude jumps out of the back seat, takes off running. And Johnny's going, go, 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 go. I stomp on the gas, whoop, take off. And I get about a mile. I go, what happened? What happened? He's like, he was drawing on us. He was drawing on us. He wanted to kill us. Take the money. Take all the money. He's drawing on us. I had to hit him. And I'm like, well, what the frick, man? Where'd you shoot him? He's like, I shot him in the head. I'm like, no, you didn't, because he ran out. He's like, we got to go back and find him. So we turn around and drive back, and there's blood all over the road, all over the place. And you can see where he ran out.
Everyone's do that.
Yeah, there's blood everywhere. And he goes in the bushes, and then you can see there's a bunch of blood, like he laid down or sat down. And then all of a sudden, there's more blood back in the road, and then it ends. We don't know what happened. We have no idea what happens. Nothing. We think he probably died. It's like listen, I was thinking aliens, bro, at the time. That's how weird it was. I'm like, aliens got this dude, like picked him up, and I don't know. Now flash forward 20 some years, right? I'm in prison. I'm walking down the hall in prison. This is right before I got out, like a year before I got out. There was an old mafioso in prison with me named Dago Tone, Anthony Cerullo. And I'd sit in the day room and talk to him, and he spoke Sicilian, and we'd talk about all these old mob stories and mobsters that we knew, right? Well, one day I leave the day room from talking with this dude, and I'm walking down the hall, and this old man says, hey, man. He walks up, like he's coming towards me. He says, hey, man. He goes, you recognize me? Or he's like, you remember me? I said, I don't know. Were we in another joint together? I mean, I've been 8 different prisons over 13 years. He says, no, and he pulls his hair back, and he shows me this big gaping gash in his head. And he says his name, and I'm like, oh, bro. And right away I said, listen, bro, I had no idea what was happening. And he said, relax, bro. I knew it wasn't you. It was your freaking lunatic cousin. I'm like, I had no idea he was planning that, bro. I was just driving to get divvy up the money. I had no idea. And he's like, don't worry. I'm not going to stab you in the neck when you're not looking to get back. I don't care. It's over. It is what it is. And but anyways, so yeah, he was just finishing up like a 17-year bid or something. So not long after Johnny shot him, he went to prison for 17 years. But anyways, so that was the type of stuff I was involved in all those years. And I was just, and then I dabbled in drugs. I broke my finger in a fight in a biker club, right? And they gave me pain pills. And I liked them, and so then this sparked in the emotion, on again, off again, pain pill addiction which lasted like 10 years, and most of the time I was off, because all that would be required is I go to jail for a few weeks on some minor something, and then I'd get cleaned off of them, and then I'd be clean for 2 years. I was a guy who worked out. I like to stay in good shape and look good. I didn't know whatever, but then. Like my best friend died, and the only way I could deal with that was popping pain pills, and then I'd be off and running for 8-9 months, and then I get caught with a pistol, and I end up in jail for 3 weeks, and then I get out, I'd be cleaned up, I'm good for another 6 or 8 months. Then I broke my ankle, and they gave me pain pills, and then next thing I know, I'm off and running. And towards the end, my house ended up getting raided because my girlfriend's brother was a snitch, and I ended up slapping him around because he said something really foul about his own sister, who was an angel. And so he went to the cops and told them that I was a big drug dealer, had all kinds of drugs in the house, whatever. And they raided the house. They found the drugs. But I didn't think they had a case to beat me because I wasn't in the house when they raided it. They had no fingerprints, no sale, no nothing. In fact, it wasn't even my official residence. So I'm like, you got no case. You had
standing.
Yeah, well, they didn't charge me for 9 months. So they said, well, we're waiting for the lab results to come back. They kind of were trying to push me into ratting, cooperating. But I wouldn't do it. They told me to come in and talk to them. And I said, do I need my lawyer? They said, no. I'm like, listen, if I go there and do I need bond money? I said, no. So I go in there and they said, well, this is what we got. I'm like, you got nothing, bro. I'm like, the guy the person who's the informant was a crackhead. And his credibility is worthless in court. You know what I'm saying? He's been busted. He's stolen money from you guys. They had given him money to buy drugs. He went in the front door and out the back door and kept the money. And then you guys arrested him a month later for larceny by trickery. So this guy's a worthless, as far as
what a witness.
Yeah, he's a worthless witness. And I said, you got nothing. You got no evidence whatsoever. You have no case. And they said, maybe not. Maybe not. The problem was everybody knew that my house got raided because one of the guys who bought weed from me, one of my young soldiers, lived across the street. And when the house was getting raided, he's the one who called my girl and said, yo, your house is getting raided. And then she called me and said, why are the cops raiding the house? And I got 2 keys of heroin. And so everybody in the street like sent a shockwave and like everybody thought I got busted. Now they get on the computer and look to see if what I was charged with, what my bond was. There's nothing there.
Where's your booking number?
Yeah, there's nothing there. Well, how are you walking around, bro? You got busted with kilos of heroin. You know, like there's no. You're cooperating, bro. The cops intentionally made it look like that. And before they raided my house, by the way, for 3 days, they followed me everywhere, even with helicopters. Even like in the movies, helicopters, like in Goodfellas, it's exactly what they did. I had one follow me for, I don't know, 35 miles, bro. I went in a straight line for 35 miles and it followed me. So then I went and hid in a subdivision, got under some trees, and that helicopter was right over the top. And like the trees were blowing. They was looking to see where I went, you know what I'm saying? And that happened 3 different times over the 3 days. So they were definitely on to me, and I was a paranoid lunatic at the time. But anyway, so nobody would deal with me. So all the guys who I bought drugs from and stuff, and by the way, I owed a mob dude who was a cousin of mine named Angelo $180,000 for the heroin that they seized. So, and the cops were like, they were determined to like, for me to rat, I think. They're going to squeeze me into cooperating because nobody would deal with me. And then what I ended up doing was robbing Peter to pay Paul. And I could have not paid Angelo. I could have just been like, listen, man, I got raided. And Angelo wouldn't even answer my calls for 2 weeks. So I had to go to his house, catch him at his mother's house. And he's like, you don't even want to talk to me. I'm like, bro, relax. I'm not ratting. I'm not, dude, listen, I'll get you your money, simmer down. This is what happened. They got nothing, He was a little more relaxed, but he was still. So I go get this black dude who's a weed dealer, which ironically I got him into the weed business. Well, he had a plug on the really good weed, really good British Columbia weed, and I told him, you need to stop selling heroin, because he was selling kilos of heroin. I said, there's way too much time. You get busted with a kilo of heroin, you get 20 years, 30 years. I said, you get busted with 1,000 pounds of weed, maybe you get a couple years, maybe you get nothing. I said, bro, stick with the weed. You got the plug. So he does. And the guy likes me and he trusts me. So I go to him one day and I said, I'd never asked him for this much weed. Most I ever asked him for was like maybe 40 pounds, 50 pounds. I said, I got a guy who's got cash. He wants 200 pounds right now. And he's like, and I'm like, yeah, meet me at the mall. And I put it in the back of this washer dryer crate thing. And anyways, he was real nervous. I could tell. And so I took the weed and never paid him and just left. Right. And he ended up tracking my girl down, though. He ended up finding out where I live somehow. And she's like, he's in jail. And he's like, for how long? She's like, a long time. And so he's just like, what are you going to do? But anyways, I used that weed to pay off Angelo. And then I also kept 20 pounds of it so I could use it for bond money and spending money or whatever. So the moral of the story is I was out there towards the end because I started gambling, which was cardinal rule violation, that I was taught by Tony Giacalone. He says, never bet against the house. If you're going to gamble, you be the house. You house the games. He taught me how to house games. So I always house dice games. I always house poker games. But one time I went to Vegas with a wealthy friend, and we were playing blackjack, and I won a bunch of money. And I was like, oh, this is fun and easy, and it's a rush, and it's addicting. Next thing you know, I'm gambling, I'm spending thousands and thousands of dollars, and then I started using drugs, because when I broke my ankle, I started using drugs. So now I'm spending $2,000-3,000 a week in gambling and drugs. And I just bought my second house, and I have new cars and four-wheelers and snowmobiles, and just trying to maintain this lifestyle. And now nobody is dealing with me. Typically, I could go to one guy and front me 100 pounds of weed, or front me 10 pounds of weed, or front me this, case of steroids or whatever, because I could move it and I'd make money. Well, nobody would talk to me. Everybody lost my number, or deleted me, or whatever. So now I'm on my own. So basically, I just resorted to what all I knew was to do gangster stuff. So I started robbing. I just grabbed the gun and started robbing. And like I asked a friend of mine, I had guns, but I had sold them to get high and stuff like that. And at one point, I'm like, I need guns to rob. So I told my friend who I knew had some guns. He had some 6 Hour 40 cal shotguns. I said, bro, let me have these guns. I'll pay you for them. And then like, we'll bust the door and make it look like somebody broke in. You can report it, get the insurance money, so you double dip. He's like, no, I'm not comfortable with that. Blah, 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 blah. He said, no. So I waited for him to go to work. I kicked in his door and I stole all his guns, right? And him and I are still good friends to this day. But he didn't forgive me till after I got out of prison. He came to the Italian festival where I was doing a book signing, and he gave me a hug. He says, bro, I didn't understand at the time, but then I got strung out on drugs myself. And then I finally understood. And once I finally understood, I was able to forgive you. So I forgive you and whatever. But anyways, so I'm running around the city, committing bank robberies and armed robberies. I'm robbing pimps, robbing drug dealers. Every drug dealer I knew got the business. Everyone, most of them were easy. I just like front me 10 pounds of weed, and then I take it and not, call them or pay them back. But there were lots of other ones. Over the years, I did this quite often where I would extort drug dealers. I knew they were moving a bunch of weed. I'd buy a few pounds. Then I'd come in with I just say, hey man, listen, if you're going to pump 10 pounds, how much you moving? He's like, I'm doing pretty good. I'm at about 10 pounds a week. I'm like, well, from now on, you got to pay me a pound a week, because that's how it works. I'm like, this is our city. You can't just pump 10 pounds a week and not pay up. What do you mean?
There's a tax.
There's a tax. I said, but if they come, if the cops are after you, we'll let you know. If you're under investigation, we'll let you know. If you get arrested, we'll get you bond. We got a bondsman, we got lawyers, we got judges. We'll help you, but you got to pay that pound a week. And
that's a tax benefit. That's
exactly, it's a tax benefit. So exactly. So and most of the time, but there are a few times where I had to knock a guy out, where I'd he'd get kicked, pushed back, and I'd wham, I hit him in the jaw, knock him out, pull a pistol, and be like, listen, man, this is how easy it is, bro. And if I can get you this easy, it's much easier to get somebody you love. So just pay up, and they always did, until they were like, oh man, my plug got busted, I can't get no more. And then I'd have to watch them really closely. But anyways, I robbed a lot of drug dealers like that over the years.
Part of the game.
Yeah, and then when I was, I tried to stay away from cocaine, robbing cocaine drug dealers or selling cocaine, because there's so many informants involved, and also there was like dangerous criminals involved, with cocaine, like as cartels and things like that. So I just stuck with like small, the mid-sized weed dealers. Like I knew guys who were moving hundreds, if not thousands, of pounds of weed. I didn't rob them for two reasons. One, I liked them. There were guys that I liked. So I'm like, I'm not going to rob a guy I like, you know what I'm saying? And two, they were also the kind of guys who, if you rob, might very well pay someone to kill you, because they had the money. They had the money and the means. And then like, hey, this guy robbed me of, $50,000 worth of weed. I want him dead. And they just, say, hey, you handle this. And they get some dude on the street who's a killer. I'm like, yeah, man, give me $5,000, I'll take him out. And they would, and that ain't worth it. So I avoided that. I was able to navigate my way through that. But then at the end, I'm robbing banks and stores, liquor stores, pimps. I robbed a bunch of pimps. I did enjoy robbing pimps. It was one of my things, because I don't like the way pimps exploit women. And
I agree.
And the first time I ever robbed the pimp, it was the first time I ever robbed the pimp was I just came from a Detroit Lions party, like private party for Charlie Batch, who was the quarterback for the Lions. And I never got a hooker before in my life. But I was like, I had all these chicks around. I was like, I'm going to get me a hooker. Like I never done it. And I got this pimp on the street on like 8 Mile. And I said, I need 2 girls. And then I got them in the room, and like the girls like, said it's going to be X amount, and the other girl's like, nah, it's something about this white boy, ain't enough money, blah blah blah. And I was like, what you say? And it just, the way she said it, I'm like, I pulled my pistol. I said, you know what, F this. I said, everybody get on the ground. When they didn't move, I shot like right by them, like through the wall, boom, and there was an alley behind it, so I knew I didn't kill somebody in the next room. And I got on the floor. Yeah, and I just wanted to let them know, and they got on the floor, and I robbed them all. I took their jewelry, their money, like a couple $1,000, and I was like, man, this was easy. Like, you know what I'm saying? I could do this all the time. And I did. I'd go out hunting pimps. I'd go driving down Woodward Avenue or 8 Mile, and I'd find some, hooker, And I say, hey man, bring me to your pimp, man. I want to, set up a party where I can get some bunch of girls there. We'll pay you really good, $500 a night, da da da. They bring me to them, and I just rob them, man. And the thing about pimps were they were always super cowardly too. They'd beg for their life and cry, please, man, I got kids, man. Blah, blah. Shut up, man. Slap them around. There was no fight in them. There's no fight in them at all. Like I wouldn't even have to use a gun. I could just beat them up if I wanted. They'd do nothing. But sometimes they had guns on them, and I'd take those too, and knives and guns. But anyways, in the end, this is what I did, and so this is where it all ends, and it actually all begins because in 2003, early 2003, the winter 2003. My girlfriend, fiance at the time, said to me, listen, it's bill day. I was getting dressed upstairs, putting on like a shirt and tie, and said, it's bill day. I'm like, and it's taxes day. And I'm like, well, how much do I need? And we split it all the time. She's like, your half is $2,200. And I reached in my pocket and I had $700. So I said, here's $700. I'm going to run to the bank, get the rest. And I had a gun tucked in my waist, and she looked at the gun and looked at me, but she didn't say nothing because she knew I always had a gun. Why are you going to the bank with a gun? So I went to the bank and I passed a note through the drive-through. Said there's a bomb in the bank. I need $75,000 in the next 90-second, or the bank goes boom. I walked into the bank and put a fake bomb on the counter in the back, where you fill out your stuff kind of off to the side. And then I walked back out, jumped in the car, drove around through the pneumatic thing, and then exactly. And the money came out. And it wasn't 75 grand. It was like 20 grand. But anyways, then I took off, and they had a tracking device in the money, and I got in high speed chase, and I lost them a bunch of times. Ended up crashing, getting out and running, and they caught me and beat me down. 6 Detroit cops cuffed me up and beat the crap out of me, stomped me out so bad that I had to go to Detroit receiving. Right as soon as they fingerprinted me, they had to go take me right to receiving because I was covered in blood all over the place. And I was not happy. I was telling them, I'm going to kill some of you guys when I get out. Just so you know, I'm killing some of you guys. I might not be out for a long time, but when I do, I'm coming for you and your kids. Especially the one that was some black dude who ran and tried to tackle me, and I ducked him, and I said, "Hey man, I give up." I threw the gun, and he come running at me again, and like Ray Lewis tried to tackle me. So I kind of I throw him in the snow. I said, I give up, man. About that time, they all bum rushed me, start stomping me, and then the one that like I threw, he said, "Why don't you shoot, white boy? Why don't you shoot? Why don't you shoot, white boy?" And he's pistol whipping me, bang, 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 and smashing my head open. I'm cuffed now in the snow, out of breath, and I'm just like, when I get out, I'm coming for your family. Of course, I was mad at the time. Now I don't care. It is what it is. I was a criminal, just robbed the bank, got in a high-speed chase. They were mad. One of their officers got crashed in the high-speed chase. And anyways, so I go to prison. So wait, before I go to prison, I got to tell you, when I'm in the county jail fighting my cases, I was charged with 17 capital crimes that carried life, right? Extortion, bank robbery, armed robbery, kidnapping, on and on and on. So there's all these heinous charges. My bond was $5.7 million, which is like, really? I mean, like, I'm going to get out.
And you had a stack of fryers.
Oh,
that always comes into play. Come on, brother.
Of course. Yeah. And they were saying I was a flight risk. I'm like, how am I a flight risk? I ain't got two pennies to rub together right now. You know what I'm saying? But so
I was robbing a bank. I was broke.
Right, exactly. So I get in a fight. Not really a fight. I just caved some dude's eye socket in. When I was at church, he stole a pie from my box. Found out who it was. I caved his eye socket in. Of course, they all snitched on me in there. All right. They all wrote kites on me and said it was me who did it because I knocked him out. The guy's laying there bleeding on the floor. And then they locked the unit down. And then, of course, under the door, they put kites. What did you see? And there was like 48 guys in the unit, and 32 of them wrote kites on me. I mean, saying I did it. Yeah. It was
hardcore guys, huh?
Yeah, real good. All black guys. That's what it was because it was a black kid who stole from me. And so, a long story, but anyways, so I end up in the hole. And while I'm in the hole, I end up getting into it with the deputies. So they keep me for another 2 months. I'm in the hole. Now I'm in the hole for 3 months. I'm on my way coming back from court one day, and I was kind of a high profile inmate. So they always put me in my own holding cell. The county jails are crazy. There's like 20 holding cells in Macomb County, and they're all filled with people who've just been arrested or they're going to court. So there's like 15 guys in each one. So it's chaos. And that's what's called the bubble, which is the control center that's, in the middle, and it overlooks all these cells in the circle. But they put me in my own cell, like the observation cell. That's all glass. And so I come back from court and I get another $1 million bond. I get arraigned. And I'm banging on the glass, making beats, boom, 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 just being, because I'm bored in the cell, waiting to go back to the hole. This officer comes in, he tells me to knock it off. I tell him to F off. I don't care about you. I'm doing me. And then they come in and they try to taser me, but the taser doesn't work. So they shut the door and I relax and I sit down. About an hour goes by and they open the door and the riot squad is there and there's about 10 of them. And they mace me and they pepper spray me. And on the way back, when they're walking me back, like 6 of them, the guy's wrenching my shoulder out of the socket. He's just like really violent, like, come on. I said, bro, I know where I'm going. Settle down. Like, you don't have to rip my shoulder out of the socket, bro. I got a bad shoulder. Chill out. Shut up, inmate. No talking. Shut up. And I said, oh, I know what your problem is, bro. You got a little dick. That's what it is. And some of them laughed. As soon as I got off the hall camera in the elevator, I felt, stop resisting. And they slammed me in there.
Good enough time.
Yeah, go time. And they just beat my ass. Stomp my out. So they get me back to the cell and back up to the bar so I can uncuff. And then I turn around. I said, come and get me now. It was 6-on-1 while I'm cuffed. I said, let's see what the 6 of you can do when I'm not cuffed, punk ass mother. And anyways, I'm all out of breath and I'm bleeding all over the place. And I just said, man, they're trying to give me 30 years at the time. And I'm like, I'm not doing 30 years, man. I'll just check out, bro. It's not that big. I've been shot a couple times. I've been stabbed. I can tell you stories, man. I had a guy put a gun to my head and pull the trigger and it didn't go off, bro. So, I've
been there myself.
So, just
a good place.
God had different plans, you know what I'm saying? And, so I wasn't scared to die. I figured they give you a razor once a week to shave in the shower, and I'll just slit my wrist, and just go to bed and check out. I'm not doing 30 years like this, bro. This ain't no life. And get home an old man. I got no family, no friends, no money, no life, no job. It's not a life to live, man. I'd rather just be with God. And at that moment, I'm sitting there blood dripping on the floor, planning out how I'm going to do this. I looked on they had taken a 5-gallon mop bucket of water and dumped it on my bunk before I got there. I remember them getting on the radio saying, hey, we're bringing Lindbloom back to his cell. Get it ready. And I'm like, what does that even mean? Get it ready. They took all my pictures and my letters from my family, threw it on the bunk, and then dumped a 5-gallon bucket of mop water over the bunk. All soaked it and ruined everything. And I'm sitting there and I look over at this letter, and it was a letter from my grandmother. And I remember in one of the letters that my grandmother wrote me, she said, Alonzo, you write the most beautiful letters. You could be a writer. You should be a writer. And then at that moment, I looked at the shelf and I saw these books. And I remember thinking, I like to read. I read a lot. I've been in there for 3 months. So I probably read, who knows, 50, 60 books in there. And I had a big reader before I went to prison. I love to read, which is the crazy part. Like, even the old mob guys that see me reading, they're like, what are you doing, reading? I was like, yeah. And like, you like to read? And like, yeah, why? I didn't take you as a reader. I'm like, why? And in their mind, they're like, yeah, big, tough guy, freaking lunatic, freaking, he likes to read novels. I'm like, yeah, I like to read. And anyways, and most of those books that I remember thinking to myself, these aren't that good. And they were written by some of the best authors in the world, like John Grisham and Sidney Sheldon and Tom Clancy and Robert Ludlum. And I'm just thinking,
read them all, brother. I read them all myself.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, these books, I'm thinking I could do better than this. Like, I think these stories, if they would have done this, and that, I could do better. So I said, and at that moment, man, hell, it just, I'm telling you, you have those moments in life where God speaks to your heart. And you just know God is talking. That was one of those moments where God said, hey, listen, hold on. I'll protect you. I'll get you to that. I looked down the hall and there was a dark hall, the catwalk. And then there was a door at the end of the hall with a little window, and it was like a little light coming out of the window. And it was like, there was like a light at the end of the tunnel. And I remember hearing God's voice saying, I'll get you to that light. I'll protect you. Hang in there. Don't give up. Walk with me. Give it all to me. I'll get you there. You are a writer, and I'm going to bless you with something special." And I said, "Okay." So from that day on, I laid in my cell, and the book cart would come along, and they'd be like, "Lindbloom, you want books?" I'm like, "No, I'm good." And they're like, "You always want books. Why don't you want books?" I'm like, "Because I'm writing books." And they're like, "What?"
Yeah.
I'm like, "I'm writing books now." I'm like, "You don't
You
have a
started
pen?"
writing while you were in prison. Then you didn't
Well, I
start
wrote them
after.
all in prison. I wrote 9 novels in prison, but I started writing while I was in the hole. So
Yeah.
I spent a total of 19 months in the hole, and about, I don't know how many, 16, 17 of those months I was writing, like, in my mind. Over 14 months I wrote 3 novels in my mind, and one of them was my book To Be a King, which is downstairs. But so I started writing novels in my mind. The whole story is beginning, middle, end. It's like a montage, the characters, the dialogue, all of it. It was all there. And then when I was done writing that one, I'd move on. I might read a book. Okay, I'm going to write another book, but in a different genre. So I'd read books from that genre for a month or two, and then I'd go start creating this next book, and that's what I did. So here's where it really gets interesting. This is where my story, if you stuck it out this far, the best part, where the good part is. So I finally get sentenced to 13 to 50 years in prison, right? First thing I want to do is start writing books, but I don't have any money. I don't have any money for pens and paper. So I get a letter about a week after I get to prison. I'm in level 4, max security level 4, locked down 22 hours a day.
No,
And
wow.
and I get a letter from a dude. It's this guy named Joe, a guy who was a drug dealer that I robbed of some pounds of weed like 8 years earlier. Basically, he fronted me some weed, like 10 pounds of weed, and I just didn't pay him. He was a big muscle bound guy, big bodybuilder, but he wasn't tough. He wasn't a tough guy. He didn't pretend to be a tough guy. He was not. He would never even pretend to be tough, but he just looked tough. And he gave me 10 pounds of weed, and he's like, "So you're just not going to pay me?" I'm like, I get when I get to it. And he's like, "All right." So he stopped talking to me, and then fast forward 8 years later, I get to prison. He's living in Chicago. He turned his life around. He stopped being a drug dealer. He became a Christian, and he gave his life to Christ. And he married a choir girl, and he has kids. So, but he's in Chicago, but he still reads the Detroit News, and he sees in the paper that I got all this time in prison. So he feels bad about it, and he writes me a letter. No. So the next day, he feels bad about it. And the next day, he's like, "I'm on my way to work." He tells me this in a letter. So I'm on my way to work the next day. I'm driving, and the Holy Spirit comes over me, and I begin to cry. And all I can think about is you. I knew you were a good dude. I knew you had a really hard childhood. I knew you had a really hard life. I'm not sure why I felt so compelled to reach out to you, but I felt the Holy Spirit was telling me to reach out to you. So here it is. Is there anything I can do for you? And I wrote him back. I said, "Yeah. Could you send me a little money for pens and paper? I want to start writing books." He did. He sent me $30. I spent 20 of it on pens and paper. It took me a year to write my first novel called Second Chance, about these 2 high school football players. I sent it to him. He read it, was blown away. He's just blown away. He's like, "Bro, this book is so good. I cannot believe you wrote this." I read it on the because now he's driving on the subway to work every day, back and forth on the subway. And he's like, "I read on the subway." He's like, "I can't wait all day. I'm thinking about the book to get home." And it's so good. He's like, "I can't believe you wrote this." So for the next 5 years, bro, about once a year, I'd send him a book. And every one of them, he's like, "These are so good. These are so good. It's good." Then in 2009, on the 6th year, I write a book called To Be a King. It's about a fictional mafia family. It's the only book I've ever written about a mafia family. It was obviously my 6th favorite book because I wrote 5 before it in front of it. But it was a story I created while I was in the hole. A very good story. And I wrote it and I sent it to him. And he's like, "Bro, this is remarkable." About that time, Facebook just started in 2009. He says, "I'm going to start a Facebook page for you, if you don't mind." I'm like, "What's that?" He's like, "Well, just maybe you can connect you with some girls from the old neighborhood, maybe get some pen pals hooked up, blah, 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 blah." So he lists on there that I'm a Christian and that I'm a writer. Then he takes some pictures that I have and he puts them up in my albums, pictures of me. Most of them are fishing and hunting pictures, right? Pictures, those are the only pictures I had from before prison was fishing and hunting. And so it puts them up there. So now one day, all of a sudden he said, "I'm going to put sample chapters of your book, this new book, To Be a King, this mafia book, out." And so I start getting fan mail, JPays, which is like prison emails. And I start getting all these people writing me, and they're going, bro, like, dude, this is better than The Godfather. You're better than Mario Puzo, bro. This is amazing. Like, I want to read the rest of this book, blah, blah, blah. Cool. And I'm thinking, wow, you guys don't know nothing yet. Like, until you read that last page of the book, like, you have no idea. And so I'm excited. I'm getting all these like random, I got so much of them that the warden, the deputy warden called me up to his office with an inspector and said, what's happening? Why are you getting all this fan mail? And I said, my friend put sample chapters of a book on Facebook. And he's like, you can't do that. I'm like, why not? And like, you can. And I'm like, there's no policy. There's no law that says I can't have a Facebook and put sample chapters on. He's like, you can't profit from your incarceration. I said, I'm not. These are has nothing to do with my life. It's a fictional book. You better stop. I'm like, well, I'm not. And I left, and they rode me out to the worst prison in Michigan. They rode me 3 days after I had that conversation. They rode me to the second worst prison, most violent prison in America, Kinross Correctional Facility. And it was 9 hours north in the middle of nowhere. And it was just a bloodbath. And it was horrible, man. 288 stabbings and 2 murders in the first 8 months I was there. Horrible.
Gladiator school, brother.
It was horrible, man. And so I just stayed to myself, kept doing what I did, write books, and worked out, mind my business. So then this is where it really gets crazy. So one day I get a letter from a girl, and she says, hey, you probably don't remember me, but I grew up in the neighborhood. She's like, I was kind of a nerd, and I grew up Muslim, so my dad didn't let me go out to parties. I couldn't go to after school activities and da da da. She's like, I don't really know anything about you other than that you were a guy who liked to fight and you were a drug dealer. I think I heard that your family is tied to the mafia, but other than that, I know nothing. But I see that you're a Christian, and I'm a new Christian. And I also see that you're a writer. And she's like, I work for a publisher in New York. Now I work in academic publishing, she says, but I have friends who work in commercial fiction. If the books, maybe I read the sample chapters, she said, they're really good. I was really impressed. If you want to have somebody send me the full manuscript, then I'll check it out. And if it's any good, maybe I can help you get it published. And I'm just doing this. I'm doing hallelujahs. Like, you got to be kidding me. God is good. How does this happen, man? There's no way. So I tell Joe to send me some pictures of her, and she's a cutie. And so we write back and forth. It takes me about a month to get one of my friends to turn the whole manuscript into a PDF, because it's 2 volumes. So it's 1,100 pages. The full manuscript is 1,100 pages. And so, trying to get someone to go to Kinko's and turn 1,100 pages into a PDF was not that easy. But my boy did it, and God bless him. And but in the meantime, me and this girl started doing a little bit of Bible study, and we started talking and discovered we got a lot in common, she loves the outdoors and animals, and she just, anyways, I finally have somebody send her the PDF. She reads the entire 1,100 pages in 3 days. She writes me a letter, and she says, these are exact words. She says, in writing and publishing, sometimes you have great writers, but the story usually isn't that great. Then once in a while, you have a great story. Usually the writing's not great. But on the rare occasion, there's the unicorn. You're the unicorn. She's like, that book is the best book I've ever read. Now, I've been hearing that for years from people in prison saying, this is the best book I ever read. And these guys in prison are big readers. These guys have read thousands and thousands and thousands of books. And they're like, bro, that's the best book I ever read. I can't believe you're in prison, you idiot. And I'm like, yeah, I know. And so I said, I'm just an idiot too, man. I end up here. So she said, I'm going to help you get published. And so we became friends, and we began writing, pen pals. And we ended up falling in love, me and this girl, through letters over the next year. We fell madly in love and deeply in love, and she waited 6.5 years faithfully for me to come home and marry her. I married her the day after my release in 2016. We were baptized. Get this. Now, my boy Billy and Joe, the one who God told to support in prison, the one who started my Facebook page that brought Maria, my wife, to me, he and Billy picked me up from prison and drove me 5 hours to where Maria was cooking a feast for us. And the next morning, I went and got married. And 20 minutes later, Joe baptized us in Lake Huron, which is beautiful. And it was like a hot July day with like the water was like 95 degrees. It was just beautiful, man. Just 24 hours earlier, I was in a freaking prison cell, Now I'm splashing around in this beautiful, tropical water. And I'm just got married. I'm free. And anyways,
no better than that, brother.
No, it was beautiful. It doesn't get any better than that. It doesn't. There's a picture of me she took where I fell asleep on the beach like this, just laying there in the sun. and it was just like
Yeah,
I was so at peace
priceless.
and finally priceless. Yeah. Then we published To Be a King. About 9 months later, like we had a honeymoon period. We did a lot of camping and fishing, stuff like that. And then we published To Be a King, and it like shot to the top of the genre. Not to the top, but I think it peaked at 28, and then volume 2 peaked at 3. And so people are comparing it to The Godfather. Everybody's like, this guy wrote the next Godfather. This guy's, this is the best mafia story that's ever been told. This is the Godfather of our generation. You can look at the reviews. To Be a King.
Yeah, I'm going to have to get a copy of it now that you shared it. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm an action adventure novelist myself, so I get it.
You'll love it. It's a very, very unique story.
One of the top stories that we've done, and I totally believe you and got love and respect for you, brother, because you know what? I've lived an insane, crazy life. 15 years in the cartels, 17 years as a contractor for the Department of Justice. Was in Folsom Prison in the 80s. I was in Leavenworth Federal Prison in the 90s. So as you're talking and you're describing the story to me, man, I mean, it was like taking a walk down memory lane for me, because we've both been in really hardcore places and we know what it takes to survive that.
Yeah.
But that being said, before I close out here, guys, Gunnar, I'm honored to know you. I love you with all my heart, brother. I love the story you shared with my audience today. You and I are both examples of sin to redemption, and I can feel you're walking God. And I just think you're amazing, and I thank you so much for sharing this absolutely amazing story. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, if people listen, just follow me on YouTube at Gunnar Detroit is my YouTube channel. And you'll be there's a documentary about my life, my story, this whole journey, my love story, all that is being made. It's being narrated in part by Armando Sante. It's really being well done. The director already has a big hit Netflix documentary on Netflix. So it's I'm hoping that it does really well and kind of brings awareness to my books. And
yeah,
sure.
And I've seen your interview. I watched your interview on the Connect. It was an excellent interview with John.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it, brother. Well, listen, guys, I've got to get rolling here. God bless you both, and God bless the audience today here at the Crisis Victory Show. Really appreciate your time and tuning in. And we ask
never give up. Never give up. Listen, you can make a comeback. You're all worthy of redemption and a second chance. Don't give up. Give your life to God. He can change any heart. I was a violent, bad guy. Now I'm a good guy. If I can change, you can change. Just remember that.
Okay, folks. Well, that wraps up another episode today. And I'd like to take this moment to thank each and every one of you for taking your time to catch our show. Now, if you like these shows, I would ask that you would please hit like, share, and subscribe. It's so important to us that we get these messages out, and we understand that these are graphic, almost toxic interviews. But, you know, this is the kind of impact that we feel is needed in order to make sure that people understand the significance of the problems that we are confronted within our own country and around the globe. So I'm going to say at this time that I love you all. God bless you all. Hasta luego, y vaya con Dios, and go Victors.